how can a so-called news organization ignore a massive news story that is on the minds of its own audience? And a little earlier, I had a rather unpleasant exchange with Justin Wells. He had sent me a bunch of very angry texts, and he had basically said I/we. So he meant I and Tucker. And I was like, wow, I've never had any, skirmish with Tucker. Why would Tucker be like in on this? Why would Tucker allow this? So literally after I put out that tweet, Tucker called me and he's like, Dinesh, I want to assure you, I had nothing to do with those tweets. Things got a little out of hand. I'm really, he said, I regret that. And he goes, I have mended fences with Tucker. I have no problem with Tucker. We both emphasize we're on the same side. We're fighting for the same cause. And so I'm all good with Tucker right now. And that tweet, to that degree, is obsolete. It's been fixed. Now, the broader point, though, is true. To this date, the movie's been out 2 weeks. There's not a single person at Fox, to my knowledge. Now, I kind of slipped through, and I was on Fox Business on Larry Kudlow's show. But I think that was literally a case where I kind of, without anybody noticing. But what's happened is none of the major hosts at Fox has uttered the phrase 2,000 mules. Think about it. This is probably one of the main things being talked about on the right. This issue, as you know, is huge. It has continued to haunt the American mind. We are offering new types of evidence. Now, Fox got into trouble for making certain statements about machines and they're being sued by Dominion. But my point is, and you've seen the movie, we don't really discuss that. We don't talk about the machines. In no way are we going to increase Fox's legal liability. In fact, on the contrary, Fox can go to court and say, listen, if we were mistaken about the machines, we were not mistaken about the fact that there was fraud. So a journalistic enterprise can get things wrong, but we were on the right track. So the movie, in a weird way, helps them and helps them legally. So, and I also don't think any news organization should take dictation from lawyers, because lawyers are basically going to operate on they will take a completely legitimate story and say you can't cover it because it's going to expose us to legal liability. How can a so-called news organization ignore a massive news story that is on the minds of its own audience?
You say don't take advice from lawyers. I say if there's reluctance to address your documentary, it's because they're taking advice from their corporate overlords and advertisers and sponsors, and then they're taking orders from PR teams that don't want to have to answer a bunch of questions. Fear runs rampant, and so I guess, and again, I know you've clarified you're not beefing with Tucker Carlson, but you can see how Tucker and others are trying to walk a delicate line of not further pissing off their corporate advertisers. They're getting pressure from their PR people that, they live in fear of the New York Times and a social media lynch mob. You know that some of these news organizations and hosts are all on your team, but they're in a tough spot.
I totally get that. So here's my thought about that. The Washington Post, there's a guy, their national correspondent is this guy named Philip Bump, and he's written about 7 articles. He knows that this is a serious matter. So he's written an article about, is geo-tracking really reliable? And he wrote another article about, could it be that this movie is showing legal votes that are merely delivered in an illegal way? And does that really make them illegal votes? So he's been trying to dispute. And then finally I wrote him and I said, hey, Mr. Bump, how about if we just do a very civil public discussion or debate about this topic? And so he said, he talked to his editors, and they've approved now doing an in-depth discussion, Q&A, in the Washington Post. So think about it. You got the Washington Post that Fox News is supposedly really afraid of, discussing the issues in the movie substantively, not just it's a conspiracy theory, but discussing issues like how do state laws vary in terms of vote harvesting? If vote harvesting is permitted in some places, does that mean that paid ballot trafficking is also permitted? That's an important distinction I make in the movie. So we're having this discussion in the Washington Post this week, and yet the topic has not been mentioned on Fox. So I guess what I'm saying to Fox is you don't actually need to be quite so uptight about it. I'm not saying you have to agree and embrace the movie. I'm simply saying you should discuss it.